The year was 1865, and the prairie lay wide and still, a sea of dust and sage where silence stretched longer than a man's patience. Jonah Hale stood on his porch, one hand resting on the rail, the other wrapped loosely around a rifle he had carried through a war that was supposed to end all wars. The boards beneath his boots were warped and sun-cracked, much like the man himself, lean, scarred, and worn thin by solitude. That morning, as dawn's light spread over the land, Jonah caught sight of movement out where the horizon blurred with heat. At first he thought it a trick of tired eyes. Then came the horse, staggering, sweat slick, foam clinging to its muzzle. A rider slumped low in the saddle, clinging by stubborn will alone. Jonah's rifle came up. Men didn't ride alone in these parts unless something hunted them, or they hunted someone else. He stepped off the porch, boots grinding grit, eyes never leaving the figure. The horse reached the fence line, faltered and slowed. The rider tumbled headfirst into the dust. He tried to rise, swayed, then collapsed hard against a fence post. Jonah moved closer, each step deliberate. He saw dark hair, tangled and matted with blood. The man's skin bore the sun's burn, and his shirt was torn buckskin, stained deep with red. Apache. Jonah's jaw tightened. Every story whispered around campfires, every raid on wagon trains, every settler's fear, this was the face of it. But instead of war cries or arrows, here lay one man, broken, bleeding into soil. The Apache's hand clutched a rifle even as his strength failed, knuckles white, eyes flashing open to fix Jonah with a gaze that dared him to finish the job the bullet hadn't. A memory cut sharp as glass through Jonah's mind. His brother Samuel, gasping in a Virginia ditch, begging for water. Jonah had been too late then. Too late to help, too late to save. That guilt had followed him west, a ghost with no grave. Jonah lowered his rifle. With a grunt, he bent, slung the wounded man's arm across his shoulders, and half-dragged him toward the cabin. The Apache weighed less than he looked, all sinew and bone, but every step left Jonah asking the same question: what fool's mercy was this? Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke, leather, and loneliness. Jonah laid the man on his own bed, the only one he had, and fetched whiskey. The wound, a bullet's cruel kiss across the ribs, had festered. Infection would kill him faster than lead. Jonah poured whiskey over the torn flesh. The Apache hissed but did not cry out. His eyes blazed, silent defiance, even in weakness. Jonah stitched the wound with rough hands, each pull of the thread binding them to a fate neither had chosen. When it was done, Jonah stoked the fire, fetched bread left from yesterday's baking, and cut a thick slice. He set it on the table beside a tin cup of water, then leaned against the hearth, rifle never far. The Apache stirred, eyes fluttering open. He looked at the bread, then at Jonah, suspicion sharpening the weariness in his gaze. Slowly he reached out, lifted the bread, and bit. The crust cracked, scattering crumbs across the scarred wood. In that sound, the silence between them shifted. Jonah said nothing. Neither did the warrior. But for the first time in years, Jonah felt the weight of another presence in the cabin, and it unsettled him more than solitude ever had. Hours bled into evening, the fire snapping, shadows long against the cabin walls. Jonah sat opposite the warrior, both men locked in the uneasy truce of necessity. Each movement was measured, as though either could shatter what fragile thread bound them. The Apache ate with slow, deliberate bites, jaw clenched as if swallowing pride along with bread. Jonah poured water and slid the cup forward. The man drank, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, eyes still fixed on Jonah as though waiting for betrayal. "Name's Jonah," the rancher muttered, voice gravel ground by years of disuse. The Apache's eyes narrowed. His lips parted, voice rough, words scraping through pain. "Chayton." The name landed heavy in the air, a word not meant to be spoken lightly. Jonah nodded once, nothing more. But inside, something shifted. The war had left him hollow, each day, on this ranch an echo of the last. Now here sat a man whose very existence promised trouble, yet Jonah felt more alive in the silence shared across the table than in all the years since he'd buried his brother. Chayton's gaze lingered on the bread, then on Jonah. "Bread, was no small thing to share out here. It was work, labor, survival. To give it freely was to give more than food. Night deepened. Coyotes yipped in the distance, their cries thin and eerie. Jonah lay awake in his chair, rifle across his lap, watching the wounded warrior sleep in his bed. He told himself it was precaution, nothing more. But as firelight flickered across Chayton's scarred face, Jonah could not help but wonder what sins or sorrows had driven him here. In the stillness, he felt the danger of what he'd done pressing in. By morning, the land would answer for this choice. Jonah heard them before he saw them, hoofbeats, steady and sure, cutting through the hush of dawn. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, eyes narrowing against the rising sun. Across the hill came a line of riders, dust lifting in their wake. Their coats, once gray, now hung ragged with dust and sweat. Ex-Confederates, men who had lost a war and found new profit in hunting. Their leader, broad-shouldered and mean-eyed, pulled up at the fence. His horse snorted, pawing the ground. "Mornin'," the man called, voice dripping suspicion. "Heard tell an Apache took a bullet near here. Worth good money to whoever points us his way." Jonah kept his rifle loose in hand but did not raise it. "Ain't seen nobody but jackrabbits." The man's lip curled. His gaze slid past Jonah to the cabin behind him, lingering too long. "Careful, friend. Harbor one of them devils, you'll share his fate. There's a bounty high enough to buy you land twice this size. But if you're fool enough to hide him," his grin was all teeth, "you'll hang with him." The air hung heavy. Jonah said nothing. His eyes stayed cold, his stance steady. After a long pause, the riders spat dust, turned their mounts, and rode off, the echo of their threat trailing like smoke. Jonah returned inside, chest tight, every nerve alive. Chayton sat upright on the bed, dark eyes unblinking. "They will come," he said, voice low, certain. "Not only soldiers. My people too. Blood follows me." Jonah met his gaze, rifle heavy in his hands. On the horizon, shadows shifted where hills met sky. Trouble was already moving closer. The bread they had shared had bound them. It had also painted a mark on Jonah's door, one that would not wash away. The sun had not yet cleared the far hills when Jonah stepped into the yard, rifle slung across his back, eyes heavy from a sleepless night. He expected to find silence, broken only by wind and birdsong. Instead, he caught sight of Chayton in the corral, shirt stripped to the waist, the wound across his ribs bound in rough linen. The Apache leaned against a broken fence post, hammer in hand. His movements were slow, but certain, every strike deliberate as he drove a nail home. The horse that had carried him to Jonah's gate nosed at a trough nearby, calmer now under the man's hand. Jonah stopped short. His first thought was that the wounded man had tried to flee. His second was that he had no reason to mend another man's fence. "You shouldn't be on your feet," Jonah said at last. Chayton didn't look up. "I should not be alive either." His voice was quiet, yet it carried. "But I am." Jonah shifted his weight, unsure how to answer. The man's defiance, his calm, his determination to mend what wasn't his, all of it unsettled Jonah more than open hostility would have. "You patching my fence to pay for bread?" Jonah asked, trying to keep his tone flat. Chayton finally raised his eyes dark and sharp. "I mend what I break, even if it was not my hand that broke it." His gaze flicked toward the hills. "Men hunt me. Their shadows follow. You took me in. That makes you part of it now." Jonah's jaw worked. He had known at the moment he carried Chayton inside, yet hearing the man put it plain made the truth sit heavier on his shoulders. "You fight for them?" Jonah asked after a long pause. "I fight for my people," Chayton answered, his voice low, measured. "For what the bluecoats and graycoats took. For what cannot be given back." Jonah's eyes hardened. "I fought for something once. Didn't get me nothing but a grave for my brother and a ranch I built with hands that still shake." The two men stood in silence, the morning air thick with the weight of things unsaid. Jonah felt a strange thread pulling taut between them. Not trust, not yet, but something born of wounds that ran deeper than the flesh. By the time the moon rose that evening, the land was restless. Jonah had felt it all day, a prickle at the back of his neck, as if unseen eyes marked every move he made. Chayton had returned to the cabin, his body weakened, but his senses sharp. He sat by the window, watching the hills with the stillness of a wolf waiting on prey. It came sudden, sharp, and brutal. The crack of gunfire split the night. A bullet tore through the shutter, splinters flying. Jonah dropped his tin cup, hand already reaching for his rifle. Down! Chayton barked, pulling himself low to the floor. The second shot shattered glass. Horses screamed outside. Jonah rolled to the door, peered into the yard. Shadows moved between the sheds. Men, armed, rifles flashing in the firelight of a lantern they'd tipped over. Flames licked at the haystack, smoke billowing. Bounty hunters, Jonah hissed. He fired once, saw a figure drop, then ducked as lead smacked into the frame above his head. Chayton moved with surprising speed for a wounded man. He seized Jonah's spare revolver, pressed his shoulder against the wall, and returned fire. His face was taut with pain, but his aim was steady. The yard turned into chaos. The barn door rattled as men tried to force it open. Horses screamed within, kicking against their stalls. The night filled with smoke, fire, and the thunder of rifles. Jonah bolted outside, crouching low, firing at shadows. He saw one man running with a torch toward the cabin, shot him down, then felt the ground jolt as another slammed into him from the side. They tumbled, fists and dirt flying. Jonah slammed his rifle, but into the man's jaw, felt bone crunch, then shoved him aside. Jonah! Chayton's voice cut through the din. Jonah turned, just in time to see a hunter raising his weapon at the cabin window. Jonah fired first, the man falling backward into the dust. The barn door gave way. Horses burst free, screaming, smoke rolling out in thick black waves. The haystack roared with fire, sparks leaping toward the cabin roof. Jonah sprinted to the well, hauled up a bucket, flung water against the flames. Chayton covered him from the doorway, revolver barking until the cylinder clicked empty. And then, as quickly as it began, the attack faltered. A whistle cut through the night. The remaining hunters melted into the shadows, retreating, leaving smoke and ruin in their wake. Jonah stood in the yard, chest heaving, sweat and soot streaking his face. The barn smoldered, one horse dead, the fence torn where men had climbed it. His land, already fragile, was now a battlefield. Chayton leaned against the doorframe, blood soaking fresh through his bandage, his eyes grim. "This is only the beginning," he said. Jonah wiped smoke from his eyes. His voice came out hard, bitter. "Damn you. They came for you, but it's my ranch burning up." Chayton's gaze did not waver. "They would come, whether you helped me or not. You gave me bread. That was enough to draw their fire." Jonah wanted to shout, to curse, to drive him out into the dark and be done with it. But the truth held his tongue. Whether he sent the Apache away now or not, the mark was already set. The cabin smelled of smoke and blood. Jonah sat by the fire, rifle across his knees, staring at the embers. His hands still trembled from the fight, though he would never admit it. Across from him, Chayton sat hunched, bandage red again, eyes fixed on the flames as if reading some omen within. "You spoke of a brother," Chayton said at last, his voice low. Jonah looked up sharply. The memory burned behind his eyes, Samuel's face pale, lips whispering prayers as the cannons thundered. "He died at Cold Harbor. We charged straight into fire. They cut him down, left me crawling in the mud beside him. I tried to drag him back, but he was gone before I could." Chayton's gaze softened, not with pity, but with recognition. "The Bluecoats made promises to my people, promises of peace, of land, of safety. Then they sent scouts to parley, and when my father went to meet them, they opened fire. My brothers died with arrows still unloosed. I live with their blood on my hands, because I was not fast enough to save them." Silence hung heavy between them. Two men from different wars, yet bound by grief that knew no borders. Jonah stared into the flames, his voice hoarse. "I buried my brother myself. The ground was wet with blood, the dirt sticking to my hands. Been burying things ever since. Hope, peace, a life I thought I'd have." Chayton nodded once, as though that truth needed no more words. I buried my people in ash. Every day since, I have walked with their voices behind me. They drive me even now. The fire popped, sparks leaping. Jonah poured whiskey into 2 tin cups, slid one across. Chayton took it, lifted it in a silent toast to the dead. They drank, not as enemies, not as friends, but as men who had seen too much. Outside, coyotes howled, their cries echoing off the hills. Jonah rose, went to the door. His breath caught. On the ridges, faint against the pale light of the rising moon, torches burned. Not just a few, many. They flickered like a chain of fire across the hills. He stepped back inside, voice low. They're gathering up. Chayton did not turn. He stared into the fire, eyes shadowed. Hundreds will come. My enemies. My people. Vengeance rides both ways. Jonah's gut turned to stone. He looked around his cabin, his land, the home he had built from nothing, and knew it stood at the edge of ruin. Chayton finally met his gaze. You shared bread with me. That bound us. Now the land itself will judge us. Jonah gripped his rifle tighter, heart pounding as the torches on the hills swayed like restless spirits. Dawn was coming, and with it a storm neither man could stop. The torches on the hills did not vanish with the night. They multiplied. By the time the first gray light bled into the eastern sky, Jonah's land lay encircled in fire. Jonah stood in the yard, hat low over his brow, rifle clenched so tight his knuckles showed white. The smell of smoke lingered from last night's attack. The barn smoldered in ruins, a fence half-burned, earth scarred with hoofprints. His home had never felt so fragile. Chayton emerged from the cabin, limping, his bandage dark with blood. His face was drawn but resolute. He scanned the ridges, his eyes narrowing. They are not bounty hunters now, he said. Some ride for gold, some for vengeance, some for blood alone. They will not leave until one of us is dead. Jonah spat into the dirt, anger and dread boiling together. Hell of a choice you dragged to my door. You made the choice when you shared bread, Chayton said, calm as stone. Jonah's teeth ground together. Yet he knew the man spoke truth. Turning Chayton out now would not stop what was coming. The fire on the ridges was too many, too hungry. Through the rising dawn, riders appeared. First a handful, then a tide. They came slow, deliberate, filling the horizon with steel and smoke. Jonah counted near 40, maybe more, a ragged band of killers and opportunists bound by greed. At their head rode a man tall, in the saddle, black coat flapping, a long rifle across his knees. His hair was silver, his face carved in deep lines of command. That one, Chayton murmured. Calder. He leads them. Jonah's stomach turned. He knew the name. Calder had worn Union blue once. A captain feared, even by his own men, for the way he drove them through blood and mud. After the war, he turned mercenary, selling his gun to whoever paid. Now his business was flesh bounty and the lives of men like Chayton. The riders halted just beyond rifle shot. Calder raised a hand. His voice carried clear across the morning air. Jonah Briggs, you've got something that belongs to me. His tone was steady, almost polite. Hand over the Apache, and we'll leave your land intact. Jonah felt every word like a hammer. His land, his blood, his silence stretched, heavy. Chayton stepped forward, shoulders squared despite his wound. I do not belong to you, he called, his voice strong. A laugh rippled through Calder's men. Calder's smile was thin as a knife. Then you'll die for me, Indian, and anyone fool enough to stand beside you. The riders spread, circling, rifles ready. Jonah's heart thudded. He thought of Samuel at Cold Harbor, of blood-soaked fields where orders mattered more than men. He thought of years burying himself in silence, believing if he built his walls high enough, the world would leave him be. Now those walls burned, and he stood with a man who should have been his enemy. He lifted his rifle, thumbed the hammer back. His voice rang out across the yard. Calder, this land's mine. Any man who crosses that fence dies on it. The words hung sharp in the morning air. Calder's smile faded. He tipped his hat, then lowered his rifle. The first shot cracked like thunder. The siege began. Gunfire roared from the ridges, bullets tearing into dirt, wood, stone. Jonah and Chayton dove behind the water trough, firing back with careful aim. Horses screamed as lead hissed past. Dust and smoke turned the morning to chaos. Jonah's shoulder jolted as a round grazed him. He gritted his teeth, chambered another round, dropped a rider clean off his horse. Chayton's revolver barked, felling another before he ducked back, coughing from smoke. The hunters pressed in, circling closer, firing from cover. A bullet punched through the cabin window, shattering glass. Another tore into the roof. Sparks spat, threatening to catch flame. Jonah's land was being torn apart before his eyes. "We can't hold like this," Jonah shouted over the gunfire. Chayton's face was grim, set with iron. "Then we move, take their leader and the rest scatter." Jonah stared at him, incredulous. "You want us to go at Calder head-on? That's suicide." Chayton reloaded with steady hands. "Better to die on our feet than burn in a cage." Jonah hesitated, fear clawing his gut. But in Chayton's eyes, he saw the same fire that had carried Samuel into cannon smoke, the same fire Jonah had buried and feared all his life. He nodded once. "Then we ride." The horses they had left were spooked, nostrils flaring, hooves restless. Jonah and Chayton saddled them fast, bullets whining past. Smoke coiled from the barn ruins, filling the air with the stench of ash. "Straight for Calder," Jonah growled, pulling his hat low. "Don't stop for nothing." Chayton swung into the saddle with a grunt of pain, revolver in hand. He gave Jonah a sharp nod. They spurred the horses hard. Hooves thundered across the yard as bullets snapped past. Men shouted, rifles cracking. Jonah fired from the saddle, one hunter tumbling from his horse. Chayton leaned low, his shot striking another through the chest. Calder's men wheeled, trying to close the gap. Jonah ducked as a shot tore his hat clean off, then swung his rifle up and fired blind. The hunters scattered, but Calder remained steady, rifle leveled, his cold eyes locked on them. The charge slammed into the enemy line like a storm. Jonah's horse crashed through, rearing as he fired point-blank into a man's face. Chayton's revolver barked again and again, emptying until he swung it like a club, knocking a rider sprawling. They broke through, dust and blood in their wake, straight toward Calder. The old mercenary raised his rifle, fired. Jonah felt the round sear his arm, hot and sharp, but he pressed on, teeth bared. Chayton leapt from the saddle, tackling Calder clean from his horse. They crashed into the dust, rolling fists and blades flashing. Calder was strong, wiry, his knife gleaming as he slashed. Chayton caught his wrist, snarling, blood running from his side. Jonah swung down, but two hunters barreled into him, driving him back. He grappled in the dirt, slammed a rifle but into one skull, then caught the other's blade on his own. Pain ripped his arm, but he shoved the man off, boots slipping in the blood-soaked dust. Chayton and Calder rolled in a storm of fists and steel. Calder drove his knee into the Apache's wound, forcing a howl from him. The knife arced down, gleaming. Jonah raised his rifle, but another hunter lunged, tackling him to the ground. The shot went wide. Jonah slammed his elbow back, felt bone crunch, then seized a rock and cracked it across the man's skull. Chayton twisted, forcing Calder's knife hand down, the blade cutting into dirt inches from his throat. With a roar, he wrenched free and drove his fist into Calder's jaw. The old mercenary reeled, spitting blood, then surged back with a fury born of decades of war. Jonah staggered upright, vision swimming. He saw Calder's blade flash again, driving for Chayton's chest. He didn't think, didn't breathe. He raised his rifle and fired. The shot tore through Calder's back. The mercenary's eyes widened. He stumbled, knife slipping from his hand. For a heartbeat he stood, then collapsed into the dust still. The battlefield froze. Riders faltered, staring at their fallen leader. Some shouted, some cursed, but none pressed forward. Chayton struggled to his feet, chest heaving, eyes fixed on Calder's body. Blood soaked him, his strength spent. He turned to Jonah, his voice hoarse. "It is done." Jonah lowered his rifle, chest heaving. The men around them began to scatter, breaking like wolves without their alpha. Some fled into the hills, others spurred their horses hard into the horizon. Within minutes, the land fell to silence, but for the groans of the dying and the crackle of smoke. Jonah stood in the wreckage, sweat and blood streaking his face, rifle limp in his hands. His ranch was scarred, his body broken, his peace shattered beyond repair. Yet something fierce and raw burned in his chest. He had stood, he had fought, and he had not done it alone. Chayton leaned against a fallen post, bloodied but unbowed. His dark eyes found Jonah's, and for the first time there was no wall between them. "You chose," he said quietly, "not because of me, because you could not turn away." Jonah's throat was tight, his words rough. "Maybe I've been turning away my whole damn life." He glanced toward the horizon, where the last of the riders vanished. "Reckon that ends today." The wind carried smoke across the plains, the sky wide and merciless. Jonah looked at his land, torn but still standing, and at the man beside him, scarred but unbroken. He felt the weight of what they had survived and of what might yet come. But for the first time in years, he did not feel alone.